We didn't come this far just to come this far.
Play action. Over the middle, caught. Touchdown, Texas.
Texas has got the best quarterback room in the SEC, probably the best quarterback room in the country.
Handoff, Baxter flips it back. Ewers throws, downfield wide open. J.P. Sanders, touchdown, Texas. How about a little trickeration for you?
Josh Pate, that Texas quarterback room, best in the SEC, maybe one of the best in the country. Eric Henry of Horns 24/7 joins us now with more. Eric, the plan for a long time has been Quinn Ewers in 2024, Arch Manning in 2025. What has to happen for us to see some type of quarterback battle this season?
Oh, man, of course, Grace. Right when I thought I could make it an entire offseason without quarterback controversy talk. No, I'm kidding. I knew that question was coming. No, to your question, what would have to happen? Quite frankly, there's no feasible scenario that can happen between now and fall in order for Arch Manning to usurp Quinn Ewers on the depth chart. It's funny you asked that because Steve Sarkisian was asked that question after the second signing period. He was asked, hey, is there an opportunity for Arch Manning to come in and possibly compete for the role? And Sark almost incredulously kind of looked at the question and was like, seriously, this again? There's no way. This is Quinn Ewers' team, a third-year starter. Quite frankly, when you take a look, and in my opinion, Grace, Quinn Ewers is the most undervalued player in all of college football. You take a look at what he did when he was on the field last year. If he had not missed the 2 games that he did due to the sprained AC joint, you're talking about a player that would have thrown for over 4,000 yards, have been right around 30 touchdowns, still under double-digit interceptions. And quite frankly, in my opinion, one of the things that makes Quinn Ewers' value just that much of a value for the Longhorns is I don't think there's a game this year that they walk into a stadium and they don't have the best quarterback on the field. That includes Carson Beck at Georgia. So in my mind, the only thing that Arch Manning has to do is continue the thing that Steve Sarkisian has asked of him, and that's to continue his progression as a quarterback. Just one quick note I'll leave you with this is during the spring game, a lot was made of his 3-touchdown performance where he threw for 355 yards. Steve Sarkisian, about 7 days, a week prior to that performance, spoke with the Austin media and said, hey, one of the things that I challenged Arch Manning to do is something that a lot of young quarterbacks struggle with, which is not to use their legs to evade the pocket, horizontally, but step up in the pocket vertically and make the throws, to deliver the throws. Because we've all seen Arch Manning's legs and what he can do in terms of using his legs to create plays. But just be that quarterback that can step up in the pocket and deliver throws, and he did that in the spring game. So he's the QB2. Quinn Ewers is the QB1.
As Texas moves to the SEC, FanDuel has their wins total listed at 10.5. They have the third shortest odds to win the national championship. So expectations nationally are as high as they could be. But what about locally? What are the expectations for this move to the SEC coming out of Austin?
Well, listen, if the expectations nationally are 10.5, the expectations here in Austin are just through the roof. And rightfully so. Again, when you take a look, let's just start in 2023. I think that was the year that really solidified it for the folks here in Austin, Texas fans, Longhorn Nation, who've been longing to be back. I've told myself I wouldn't use that phrase here, but, hey, here we are, right? Long really be back. The fact that Texas answered the call each time when they were challenged by each Big 12 team, Steve Sarkisian talked about the fact that, hey, with this being our farewell tour in the Big 12, we're going to get every team's best shot. We're going to be every Big 12 team's Super Bowl. And outside of the Oklahoma game, in which, quite frankly, had they just executed better in the red zone, they would have won that game. They answered the test each time. I think winning that game in Alabama proved something to the players on the roster. And there's still a fair amount of guys who are returning from last year's group, even notwithstanding the amount of guys, the double-digit guys who were drafted in this last year's draft. So to your question, what are the expectations? It's to come out and win the SEC year one. And quite frankly, you take a look at the schedule, you don't get Tennessee, you don't get Missouri, you don't get LSU, you don't get Ole Miss. Those are all teams that were, ranked in the top 25 and were double-digit win teams last year. The teams they do get, Vandy, Arkansas, a rebuilding Mississippi State, Texas A&M, of course, you renew that rivalry, and of course, it's a dangerous game, but still a team that's rebuilding. So even when you take a look at their SEC schedule, they got, no disrespect to the programs I mentioned, but the lower end of the SEC this year. So outside of that stretch where you go Oklahoma, Georgia, you expect Texas to just really be able to impose their will on some of these teams that they're facing in conference.
Yeah, it's looking good for them. Now, one of the big storylines after spring ball, and this came from Sarkisian himself, was depth at defensive line, specifically tackle. What type of progress has been made or needs to be made in that area?
It's the $1 million question. Listen, when you have T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, right, like two of the top defensive tackles in the nation, you're not going to replace those guys. Sark's been open about it. Listen, we can't replace them. What we can do is try to get a certain amount of the value. And Grace, my position has been, if they can get 75 to 80% of what they got last year, they're in good shape. That starts with Alfred Collins, a fifth-year guy who, quite frankly, is a 5-star recruit by 24/7 Sports, has all the potential in the world, just need to have his motor really come through and be consistent game in, game out. He answered that call in a reserve role last year. They're looking for him to step up and be a starter. He and Vernon Broughton. Steve Sarkisian said that he was confident and was comfortable with his starters, but those two guys will head the group. Behind them, a slew of transfers. They brought in Tia Savea in the first signing period, and then even after the start of spring ball, you bring in a Bill Norton from Arizona, you bring in a Jermaine Lole from Louisville. What that says to me, Grace, is okay, the guys that were on our roster, while sure we're happy to have them, they're not performing up to expectation when you bring in two defensive tackles post spring ball. So you got kind of puts the spotlight on guys like Sadir Mitchell, a 4-star recruit from New Jersey, guys like Aaron Bryant, even Alex January, a true freshman coming in. Can those guys answer the call? But all things considered, they're going to kind of moneyball this thing. They're going to kind of say, hey, we have to play 6 defensive tackles. Can we get 6 guys as a group to kind of give us 75 to 80% of what T'Vondre and Byron did? If they can do that, they'll be in phenomenal shape.
I was listening to an episode of the Horns 24/7 podcast. You and Chip Brown do a great job, but you guys mentioned with all this wide receiver talent coming in, how do they even get all the guys onto the field? So I want to ask you players to watch. I know you're going to include the wide receivers, but who should we watch in 2024?
Well, here's the thing, Grace, right? When you get a raise like Steve Sarkisian did, those are $10 million salary issues. So Sark will have to figure out how to get those receivers on the field. But in terms of guys to watch, I'll throw out a handful. One, we'll start with Jaden Blue. Even though you're talking about a running back who only rushed, for 398 yards last year, someone who really broke out, had a 100-yard performance in the Texas Tech game. You saw him perform well in the Sugar Bowl, and the expectations with he and C.J. Baxter, quite frankly, are through the roof. There are a lot of people here, if you talk to some of the coaches, who believe that they can have the best 1-2 running back punch in the nation. I know those are lofty expectations, but Jaden Blue is a guy to keep an eye on. Next, you go to the offensive line, you look at Cam Williams, who's probably going to take over for longtime starter at right tackle Christian Jones. He started one game last year when Christian was injured. Can he protect that right side of the offensive line? Of course, Quinn Ewers blindsides the left side, and that's in great shape with Kelvin Banks Jr., but can you solidify that right side with Cam Williams? Then you flip to the defensive side. I mentioned Alfred Collins. If he's a guy who, again, is so massively, talented and potent, and the potential is just there. If he can bring that game in, game out, snap in, snap out for 40, 45 snaps a game, I'm not saying you're getting a Byron Murphy or T'Vondre Sweat, but you're getting someone who is just a supremely talented player and someone who's certainly capable of being an all-conference player in his own right. The last two guys to round out, I'd take a look at the secondary, a revamped secondary. Probably if you had to pick one weak spot, quote unquote weak spot of the Longhorns defense, it was the secondary last year, ranked 12th in the Big 12 in passing yards allowed. Look at safety Derek Williams Jr. He really emerged as a true freshman, someone who was part of a 5-player platoon at safety for Pete Kwiatkowski and the Texas defensive coordinator in the back end there. And by the end of the year, he was a starter, and Pro Football Focus ranked him as the best overall safety for Texas. He's a guy who's really emerging, I think, paired with Andrew Makuba as the 1-2 punch back there in safety should be good. And last but not least, as I mentioned, the wide receiver room. It's going to be between, in my mind, Silas Bolden, Oregon State's leading receiver last year. He just arrived in Austin in the summer. Can he hit the ground running and make the type of impact that you would assume he can have in this offense? Because you have a 5-star recruit in Ryan Wingo. You have last year's top recruit, the receiver, in Jonte Cook, all pushing for playing time. And Steve Sarkisian is someone who his wide receiver rotation has been notoriously tight. It's been 3 guys. Even look at last year. It was Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, Jordan Whittington. If he's going to expand that this year to possibly 4, who's going to be that 4th guy? Because you have Matt Golden, you have Isaiah Bond, and then, of course, Silas Bolden, Jonte Cook, Ryan Wingo. So who's going to be those guys at the receiver room? That'll be a position to kind of keep an eye on.
Eric Henry with the latest from Austin ahead of a huge year for the Texas Longhorns. Thanks so much, Eric. And for more Longhorns news and analysis, be sure you check out horns247.com. Our team out in 40 acres is keeping you up to date from practices, games, press conferences with the news you can't find anywhere else. That's horns247.com.